Hi everybody, I hope you can hear me. First of all, we, as in Edwin and I, and also Kate and Dawn, make up books and beverages. And one of the things we do is do events here at the library every month, and we introduce authors to you who tell you a bit about their books. And it's my great pleasure today to welcome Gianetta Murray, sitting there looking very modest, and D.A. Adamson, otherwise known as Doug, to you today. And would like, first of all, so you know a bit about what they're doing and what they're getting up to, is to tell you a little bit about their current books and read you a short extract. Netta, can I ask you to start, please?
Sure.
And I will turn this off for a second.
So yes, Netta, please. Gianetta is a mouthful. I am obviously not Yorkshire bred and born. I moved over here about 20 years ago from California, and not terribly coincidentally, I write murder mysteries, and they're about a librarian who moved here from California and married a British man. He's over there. But he's not nearly as nice as the one in the book. So yes, this is my murder mystery series. I also write short stories. I have a collection of paranormal humorous stories called A Supernatural Shindig, and I also write short stories with a couple different groups of authors from Canada and the UK and America. So that's me. I'll read a short excerpt.
Yes, please.
Oh, it's going to be hard to do.
Would you like to introduce it first?
Yes. So, as I mentioned, Move to Murder is the Vivien Brandt series, and she is a California librarian who has married a Brit and moved to England to a Yorkshire village. It is set in and around Doncaster, for those of you who are familiar with that marvelous city. And I will, in this scene, Vivien has gone to a party. She's just moved here. She's gone to a party at the local bigwig's house, and his somewhat icy wife, think Kate Blanchett in some of her more icy roles. And she's gone roaming to the toilet and spotted a library. She's very excited about. She's also studying interior design as a new career. Having just finished setting up a smallish library in her own home that day using a few basic IKEA shelves, Vivien was swamped with envy as she viewed the richly carved mahogany ones built into the three walls of this much grander room. A large rosewood desk took up floor space at one end, and the remaining wall featured a grand marble fireplace. French doors across from where she stood opened onto a dusk-darkened garden. Sorry.
She's enjoying it.
Vivien knew she was snooping, but it was a beautiful room, and she took another step inside to have a better look. Green leather wingback chairs were placed on either side of the fireplace, and it was from the depths of one of these that a gruff voice said, "Come in, my dear." This was followed by the appearance of a face around one side of the chair. The face had a ruddy complexion and sideburns that Vivien just knew would be called mutton chops if fashion allowed. These were paired with a handsome mustache that curled slightly up at each end. Vivien realized she must be looking at Rachel's father, the army captain. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you. I was just admiring the room," she said. "Nonsense, you're not disturbing me at all," the man replied. I thought I knew all the beautiful women in these parts, but I see I was mistaken, and a benevolent God has saved me the best for last. Do come and sit and tell me who you are and where you've been all my life. I'm Jeremy Hardwick, commonly, but respectfully, referred to as Colonel J. Vivien cautiously walked across and seated herself on the edge of the other wing chair. She'd have to be careful. This one was turning on all the charm, although he had to be in his 80s. He was dressed in gray wool trousers with a knife-edge pleat, a white shirt, and what could only be described as a burgundy smoking jacket, complete with gold-tasseled belt tie. As if this wasn't enough to suggest he was relaxing after hunting tigers with the Raj, she glimpsed a volume of Kipling's Just So stories open on his lap. She surmised there was no one at the party who would be impressed by a military past, hence dear Papa had been instructed to amuse himself in the library. I'm Vivien Brandt, commonly and rarely respectfully known as the American. We just moved into the neighborhood. Pleased to meet you. Brandt? Thought for sure the name I heard was Wooster. Not married yet, then? Is there hope for me? Colonel J tried for a rakish grin, which was somewhat marred by a couple of missing teeth, but was a game attempt nevertheless. She thought he was probably going for eligible, mature bachelor look, but in Vivien's view, he came across more as Randy great-uncle. Sorry, no, she replied. I am married to the Wooster fellow. I kept my name. Silly nonsense. Woman shares a man's bed, she should share his name. Tradition and all. Well, it's actually my bed, so if anything, Geoffrey should be taking my name in that case. And I hope you don't mind me saying, but tradition has been an excuse for all kinds of horrors throughout history, so I'm afraid it carries no water with me. However, I hope this doesn't mean we can't be friends. Colonel J chuckled. Shouldn't think so. Small village. Too difficult to be making enemies over trifles. Got enough already. Enemies, not trifles. Nice trifle wouldn't go amiss right now. He really should be puffing on a meerschaum pipe with a brandy glass in hand, thought Vivien. His act cried out for it, even if he was too young to have served in India. Then she noticed a whiskey glass on the cherrywood table next to his chair and smiled. Close enough. She could tell it was a strong whiskey because she smelt the peatiness from over a foot away. Would you like me to get you a plate of food, Colonel? She asked. I didn't see any trifles, but there's a kitchen full of cooks, and I'm sure you can have whatever you want in your own house. My house! The Colonel gave a bark of laughter. My pension doesn't rate this level of luxury, he proclaimed. Besides, except for the boy, I prefer the company of my neighbors over in the meadows, which is where they stash retired relatives around here. No, I'm well aware the children only invite me to these dues in case they need a military title to influence votes. But I get to eat well and enjoy the company of lovely ladies such as yourself, so you won't hear me complain. Much. Colonel J grunted happily at his own wittiness before refocusing slightly rheumy eyes on Vivien. Now, let's talk about how that bed-stealing husband of yours doesn't deserve you and why I do. The sound of a heavy sigh caused Vivien to look over her shoulder as her hostess walked into the room. Father, what are you doing monopolizing my new guest? Rachel demanded before turning towards said guest. I'm sorry, Vivien. I shouldn't have left you on your own. My father tends to pounce on those separated from the pack.
Thank you. Do you want to use this one?
It's okay.
Okay. And if I can pass you now, thank you for that. That was very jolly, which I knew it was going to be. And now for something completely different, as it was once used, over to Doug. Would you like to say a little bit about your book first and then read us a bit?
Hello, everybody. Very nice to see you all here today. I hope you can hear that. Am I talking at the right level? I think so. Okay. As I say, I write under the name D.A. Adamson because if you Google Douglas Adamson, my full name, all you get is Doug Adams and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So that's purely a marketing term that I have to be careful of. I have written 3 books. This is my 3rd novel here, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. I'm a retired advertising writer, so I spent a lot of time being a wordsmith, so it's been my passion in my life is to write. It's as a vicarious pleasure, and in my retirement I've had more time to write. I've got 2 previous books that were self-published that are comedic stories. One of them is on the stand there, set in North Yorkshire, about a bank manager who robs his own bank, but this story is entirely different. This is about 2 young men who, in that wonderful age of 1968, suddenly decide they're going to throw up their jobs, much to the despair of their parents, and do what all good things were doing. They couldn't quite follow the Beatles and go to India, but they decided they would try and hitchhike to Marrakesh. On their journey, they meet a very beautiful French girl. And it's the time of 1968. If you imagine, that's when the Vietnam War is going on. In Paris, they're ripping up the cobbles and rioting and talking about La Révolution, etc. And so it's a great time of change. And meanwhile, out in San Francisco, they've all got flowers in their hair or somewhere else. So it's a big time of change. And so the boys, these 2 boys, they're in their early 20s, late teens, early 20s. They decide to head off. And on this journey, they meet this young girl. And I'm going to read the 2, just to explain the 2 characters for you. The 3 main characters. The first one is Angus. He is the son, an academic son, of a rather strict Presbyterian father who is also a preacher. He's also the head of his school. Another young man who is the son of Jewish refugees who fled Poland just before Hitler managed to gas all the Jewish people. And so he is a bright but naughty was a naughty boy and is still a naughty young man, but very intelligent and very charming. And they meet a very nice French art student. She's studying fashion design in Paris, where she's about to go to Paris. And she, again, is 18-year-old, but a sort of ingenue, should we say. So I'm going to read a passage from this bit, just bear with me. And you'll get a flavour for the characters of these two. And also to tell you that behind the story, in the background to this, it's a story of love, betrayal and redemption. And behind the story, unbeknown to the three protagonists, there is a similar story in the family of a torn love affair in 1944 wartime France between a resistance member, a member of the Maquis, and also a member of the SOE. So I don't wish to spoil the whole story by telling what happens, but I'll just give you the little bit when they start to go hitchhiking. If I can get my specs on. So much for the white cliffs of Dover, remarked Pete, as the Maid of Kent ferry steamed out of Dover harbour, bound for France. A cold, swirling sea fog shrouded their view of the legendary chalk edifices as they pulled on their heavy tweed jackets and wind cheaters. France, here we come, said Angus. Let's have a beer, said Pete. Pete had never been abroad before, and his disillusionment with foreign travel quickly became apparent. Their first night was spent sleeping in a field. The night was clear, their resting place a grassy undulation, the remains of a World War I trench. It had become warm, and the pair were tired and couldn't be bothered to erect their tent. We are under the care of the starry heavens. Think of it as our sanctuary, said Angus, in his usual poetic vein. More like purgatory, replied Pete, as he curled up in his sleeping bag and tried to turn his lumpy rucksack into a makeshift pillow. Next morning, they staggered stiffly into a cafe overlooking the curved east end of a beautiful medieval cathedral. Where the hell are we? Asked Pete. Soissons. Nice church, if you're into that sort of thing. My father would have approved. No, on second thoughts, maybe not. Too ostentatious, very Catholic high church. It was another of his pet hates. Your dad had a lot of those. Pete lit up his third cigarette and forced down a tiny cup of bitter coffee. His ham baguette had scarred the roof of his mouth. Ouch! Bloody French bread. My mouth feels like it's been chewing razor blades. You'd better have a croissant next time. Angus ignored Pete's moaning. We'd better get on the road, he said, with quiet enthusiasm. It wasn't long before a small Renault Dauphine pulled up and a middle-aged man jumped out. Hop in, boys, he said, in good English. Where are you headed? Paris, they said in unison. We sound like the Everly brothers, said Pete, as his spirits rose. I can take you some of the way, said the Frenchman. The friendly driver explained he taught English in a French school and had trained in England. And the man's attractive wife spoke some English, and she told them they had just dropped off their son in Lille, where he was starting his first job. The couple were heading home to Reims. Although the boy's destination was Paris, they decided to accept the diversion. After all, what was the rush? Pete spoke no French. Normally he remained mute and offered round his gitan. However, spurred on by the presence of an attractive English-speaking French lady, he leaned forward from the rear of the car, to engage her in conversation. French clothing is so chic, he said, attempting to exercise some of his persuasive savoir-faire. He burbled on about French dress sense and kept dropping Chanel into his sentences, as it was the only name he knew associated with French clothing. When he exhausted this theme, he veered into French art cinema, a subject on which he knew absolutely nothing. He was determined to hold the good-looking woman's attention. She smiled at him in a bemused way and barely understood a word he had said. Her husband did some of the translation. After muttering uncomprehendingly about cinema verite and Brigitte Bardot, Pete remembered seeing a striking film poster somewhere for the film God Created Woman. After that, he dried up. As Pete floundered, Angus came to his rescue. Diplomatically changed the subject and asked about the couple's son's new job as an engineer. Temporarily thwarted in his charm offensive, Pete slunk back in his seat and stared moodily out of the window at the rolling fields of Az. They arrived in Reims at about 6 o'clock. By now they were all on Christian name terms. Jacques and Adeline invited the pair to sleep in their garage, which had a soft gravel surface, ideally suited for sleeping bags. The pair were invited inside for supper of a delicious soup and bread, cheeses, copious salads and fruit. This was followed by some foul-tasting white stuff called Danone, their first experience of yogurt. They drank several bottles of red wine. Too much wine and I cannot teach, said Jacques, and with a bonne nuit he retired to bed. Angus, also tired out, disappeared with his sleeping bag to the garage. Adeline, now tipsy and flattered by the attention of the charming dark-haired Englishman, was happy to flirt with her young admirer in the spirit of the French entente cordiale. When Pete eventually crept into the garage sleeping quarters, he declared to a sleepy Angus that he took everything unflattering he may have said back about the French. On the following day, Adeline drove the pair to the best spot to which to hitch to Paris. On departure, much to Angus's embarrassment, Adeline unashamedly kissed Pete on the mouth. Angus made do with a peck on both cheeks. Bon voyage, she said with a broad smile. You're behaving like Sid James from a Carry-On film, said Angus, as Pete waved at Adeline's car as it disappeared towards the city.
Thank you. Well, if I can start with Netta, perhaps, give Doug a moment to get his breath back. Can I ask you, first of all, what inspired you to write your book, or your books actually, because it's now beginning to become a series, and why that sort of particular genre? Would you describe it as cosy crime, or is it, how would you describe it?
Cozy crime adjacent.
To what?
It can get a little more heated than cozy crime, but I do promise there's not a lot of blood and no animals are killed. So fits fairly well in cozy.
Right.
What inspired me? Well, again, my husband said once I retired I needed to look busy, so he didn't make me get a paper route. So that's the excuse he wants me to use, but I wouldn't have gotten a paper route anyway. I've always written. I was a technical writer. I did websites and computer literature in Silicon Valley when I lived there, just south of San Francisco. So I've always been a writer and a librarian, little dual career there. So when I came over here and retired from my last job, I thought it's time to write something fun that's not all about semiconductors. So that's when I started writing the Move to Murder series, as well as collecting short stories. And I joined the Doncaster Writers Group, which meets twice a month. If anybody wants to join us, you're welcome. As for cozy crime, I want to write things I want to read. So I read a lot of, I grew up with Agatha Christie and my favorite Josephine Tey and others like that, and thought that's the way I've got to go. I like the puzzle of creating a mystery and putting in the red herrings and working it out in the end.
Thank you. And Doug, if I can pass this over to you.
Shall I take this one?
Yeah, whichever one.
Might be easier.
That's fine. So, as you say, this is your third book. So, what made you change from sort of comedy to a much more serious romance?
Well, I think with all my books, there's an element of irony in them all. I have an infectious sense of humour, dry as it may be. But I decided, to be honest with you, that story of sleeping in gravel and being picked up by a teacher in a Renault Dauphine is absolutely true, because in 1968 I went hitchhiking with a pal of mine to France. I went on a number of occasions. I was there when they were ripping up cobbles in Paris, and I was interviewed by Le Flic, Not that I mentioned that in there particularly. So I had an experience of that, and that was the start of the story, but the rest of it is pure fiction. I've always been fascinated about wartime stories. I'm of the generation of which parents were involved in the war, and post-war formed a part of growing up and hearing about it. And so I suppose that's another reason why that figures as the dual story in this book.
Thank you.
And I've always written, and also why did I get into it? I was an advertising writer. I was completely lazy at school. The only thing I was any good at was writing stories, and occasionally the teacher would ask me to read them to the class. And so it's a vicarious pleasure, which I love, and I love putting the words on the page.
And to sort of move on from that, no, it's all right, I hadn't got it at the right angle. To move on to that, you write, as you say, about the resistance in 1944 and the story that comes from that. How much research did you have to do to get the things right? And although 1968 doesn't seem so far away, it's far enough away that these days we still have to do historical research for it. So how much did you do?
Well, I think 1968, yes, I needed to double check, and so there's pictures on the back here of the riots in Paris, among other things. I had to make certain they were royalty free. But it was good to be reminded about that. It was my hitching experiences I had of a number of different places are still very vivid in my memory. I met some lovely people, people who were unbelievably kind. The man who picked us up when we slept in his garage. My colleague didn't make off or flirt with his wife at all. I might have added that into it. But he did get his children all out of bed, and we all shook hands, and they gave us this food, and they'd never met us before. So the chap was obviously an Anglophile because he was teaching English. But they were very kind. But in terms of doing the research on World War II, a lot of that is readily available now. I didn't use I used Wikipedia. I didn't use ChatGPT. I know you're going to talk about that later, but that didn't come into it. And I did have a certain amount of residual knowledge on my own about the SOE, and I'd written novels about the Special Operations Executive, right, and about the women that were actually flown into France and did very brave things. So it wasn't too difficult to research, to be honest.
So you were already sort of halfway there and just pulled it out.
That's true, yeah. It was lurking around in the back of my head.
Right. But no real flirtatious ladies in real life?
Well, I did meet a beautiful French girl when we were hitching. That is also true. But that's another story, to be honest with you.
Or later in the book, as it's otherwise known. Nat, can I pass to you? Because I know in your second book, I've got it written down here, Dug to Death can't be a good bit of alliteration. You talk about archaeology and this field is going to be dug over. How much research did you have to do?
My whole life has been research. In addition to being a librarian, which you're very much trained in research, I have multiple other university degrees, and one of them is in archaeology. So when they say write what you know, I do have something to pull from. My mother once said after I graduated with my 4th degree, I hope you can add them up and do something useful someday. So there you go. So yeah, there is that. I would say the most research I end up doing, well, there's 2 bits. My writers group I read to every week, and they tell me where I've gone wrong on South Yorkshire. They wouldn't say that. They wouldn't use that word. Here's what they'd say. So that's very useful. The second thing is, of course, police procedural. There's not a lot in cozy mysteries. You can get away with things like the fact that DIs really don't go to crime scenes anymore, but you can still put them in tangentially. But I have to do a lot of research on computer and through friends to figure out what proper police procedures would be.
You just have to find a nice policeman who also writes, pick their brains.
Does it?
We've had 1 or 2.
Yeah.
So that's really helpful. Moving on, and this must be quite hard for you because presumably Vivien isn't at all like you, and your husband's already denied being the wonderful husband, so, well, your wife has anyway. So I'm going to ask you, what is your favourite character in your books?
Well, to be fair, Vivien is part me, but personally, I relate a lot more to Sydney the Siamese cat than I do to Vivien. But aside from those, my favorite is her neighbor and best buddy she makes, Haley, because Haley is petite, wears wild clothes, has a wicked sense of humor. And in the second book, Dug to Death, she is writing a soft porn but very still moral novel about a preacher, about a C of E minister who has been distracted from his calling by a pole dancer named Beulah. And it's called Ties and Thighs. So there's a lot of fun to be had with Vivien helping her come up with the proper words, for descriptions of certain acts and things. But it's all clean, don't worry.
I think I want to read Ties and Thighs.
I wondered if I'm in the wrong genre, because I'm writing the third book, Shipped to Slaughter, right now, and she's made quite a following with Ties and Thighs.
Oh dear. I'm looking at Edwin, but I'm not going to say anything about smutty books, so we will pass over very rapidly, unless you really want to know. When you write a book, often people say the endings are the most difficult part. When you started your books, whether it's this one, that one, did you know how your book was going to end? Had you already plotted that out? Or did your characters take you in sort of wild ways that you weren't expecting?
Did you want me or Doug?
Oh, sorry. Doug, you've got the microphone, so it's all yours.
In the case of this book, yes, I did have an idea what the ending was going to be. Not at the very beginning. The first book I wrote, I had the faintest idea how it was going to end. I kept on writing it, then rewriting it. But it is better to think you've got an idea of where it is ending up. Just on the subject of, sort of change the subject slightly, but it's very funny because obviously sex obviously sells. You've only got to look at the 50 Shades of Grey, with it. 50 Shades of Grey, which was an appallingly written book. I've never read it, but it's appallingly written evidently, but it was so successful. Which is, I think, is something. You've either got something. There's a book that's just come up. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's called Theo Golden by Alan Levi, and this is an encouragement to those who have self-published. This is an American guy. He's my age. He's in his 70s, just getting to 70. His first book is published, and he published it in 2023. And I know I'm going off subject here, but I think it's quite relevant. He published it in 23, sold 3,000 copies, which is quite a lot for an unpublished book. The next year he sold 25,000 copies, and then by the time a publisher got hold of it, which was Simon & Schuster, eventually bought the rights, he was selling 1,000 books a day. And his story has a strong Christian theme, and it is about unexpected encounters in his life and how people have encountered God. It sold very well initially in the Bible states of America. And it was picked up all over the place, and it's become this one terrific bestseller. So it proves that sex doesn't always sell, but it's one of the exceptions of a self-published book. I know it's now being picked up by a big publisher that has been an enormous success. So it's encouragement to all those people who do self-publish. I mean, I did get a publisher for this particular book, but people who do self-publish, it is a struggle. It's a great struggle. Sorry, I forgot what was the original question. I've droned on now.
Hang on. Well, I was waiting for the great denouement of what he was writing about, but it doesn't have to be sex. Although I'm waiting for Netta's next book with great interest. So yes, you're right. But the thing, I did ask whether when you start writing a book, whether your characters take you away in different direction. I mean, I find when I'm writing, the characters actually become very real, which is scary because they live in your head and they're telling you things and it's pure imagination. Sometimes the characters say, no, that's not for me. I wouldn't do things like that. And I wonder if you've had that sort of experience and where you started off with your two young men and whether they developed in ways that perhaps you weren't expecting.
Partially. And I think one of the key things as an author is you've got to make certain that your characters remain in character, because you can drift off. And if you have a lot of characters, in my first book, there was a lot of characters. I had a great chalkboard of them all, actually, pinboard of all the who were and what they were called, and really what some of their characteristics were to make certain they remained in type, effectively. They didn't go off piece, so to speak. So yes, and you do get into the heads of these, and because I had three main protagonists, and obviously writing on behalf of Françoise, who's the girl in this thing, is difficult for a man. You've got to think about how a woman would look. Some male authors are very good at doing that. It's the first time I've really had to do that. The two boys, it was easier for me to do and to relate to, because I'm obviously a male.
Thank you. Netta, would you like to... I presume your murder mysteries take a great deal of planning and plotting before you start writing, or are you much more sort of, you have an idea and see where they take you?
For those of you who don't see a lot of authors, there are of course plotters and pantsers, and just like they sound. I have a friend who plots everything out on spreadsheets before she starts everything, and others who just have an idea and go for it. I am what's called a plantser. I do like a 2-page plotting of all the major actions and who does what and who's going to be the murderer and how they're going to solve it. But at least with Move to Murder and Dug to Death, by the time I got to the end, it wasn't the same murderer. Whoops. So I had to go back and look for everywhere, put in different red herrings, because as I went and got to know the characters, it was the biggest surprise to me that they do start to speak to you. They do start to evolve in your head. So as I got through the books, all of a sudden I would go, oh no, he's the murderer. Oh yeah, of course. No, she is, whatever, So yeah, I do try to plan as much as possible, and most of that makes it in, but I don't count on the murderer being the same.
How fascinating, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
So that really does take your stories in different directions. And while you've got the microphone, if I may,
Sure.
if I may, moving on, are you self-published or are you using a publisher?
I am, as you might have guessed, a lifelong learner, so I approached this with a plan. I had a bunch of paranormal mysteries, and I dipped my toe in self-publishing to find out what it was all about with that first.
Right.
And I published that collection and designed the cover myself and everything, and put that out just as an experiment. When I started with Move to Murder, knowing that it was going to be a series, I decided to go with a professional publisher because I wanted to know, again, how all that worked. Because Alzheimer's doesn't so much run as sprint through the females in my family, I didn't have time to go find an agent, go find a publisher who was going to do it, because that takes like 4 or 5, even more years to do. And I'm already in my 60s. I needed to get it done. So I did some research and went through a hybrid publisher where you pay part of the costs and they recoup some of it when it's published and they sell the copies. And you do still have to apply, they do still have to accept you and make sure that it's a decent book that will sell. Yeah, so I did that, and I learned a lot about marketing. I learned a lot about the procedure of professional publishing, which was really useful. With Dug to Death and all that knowledge, I went back to self-publishing. But the two things I still do pay for, I think are essential, are an edit, because you can't edit yourself. It's just a lost cause, at least not finally, and a cover, because the cover sells the book, we all know. So those are the two things I still pay for outside professional help.
I have to confess, Edwin does, he has a business where he helps authors to self-publish. And for his sins, he has been publishing my books for quite a while. And he says, all you need to do is this, and I look helpless. And he's very good at it. Aren't you, dear? He is also the most patient person I know, which is he needs to be. So, but moving on to you, Doug, you say that you had a publisher. So, how did you find a publisher?
Well, the publishing industry is a nightmare, and actually, I have a children's book coming out in beginning of March, which actually is hybrid. It's the first time I've used a hybrid. So I'll see what that experience is like. My first 2 books were self-published, probably because out of frustration I couldn't find anybody to publish it originally. So I thought, I had this book, I've been working on it for ages. I thought, oh, damn it, I'll get it done. I'm fortunate that I worked in the advertising marketing business. I know people who can do design. That's done by a very good friend of mine who I've worked with for many years. The other book that's up there called The Wimbledon and the Bavarian Incident, again, was designed by a graphic designer that I knew and who I could bung a small amount of cash to but not pay the normal rate. So that was a bit of mates rates, got around that problem. With this book, I read it, I probably wrote it about 7 or 8 years ago in its first draft. I then sent it off to, more recently, I dug it out the drawer. I thought, I must do something, because I've written another book as well, that's by the by, but I dug it out the drawer. I thought, I must do something with this because it's getting on my nerves. So I then sent it to a company called Jericho Writers. And you can choose somebody who will examine the book and go through it and give you an editorial assessment. And I chose somebody who'd written about war, had written about war stories, also written slight romance, because it is romance as well. She came back with a wonderful 10-page summary.
Wow.
She said, this isn't right for publishing yet, Doug. She said, she was quite frank with me about it all. She said, it's good, you've got a good storyline. I went away, I took her notes really on board, I rewrote it. The stories remain the same throughout, but I've changed the chapters, I've changed some of the influence. She did talk about, I don't think you've actually written about the girl, Francoise, very well. So I had a good look at that, thinking about how I could improve it. So I got assistance with that, and that was very helpful. And then I actually did give it to somebody who was a freelance, who did an edit, and then the publisher, because I thought it was pretty well near it, but no, the number of odd typos or the word wasn't quite right. I mean, there was a lovely one that she said, the vicar was going, he's a Presbyterian minister, and I said he went back to his vicarage. She came back and said, no, they don't, they have a presbytery.
Yes.
I didn't know that. I was, completely wrong. And in my first book, I put something about a Bonneville motorcycling that I got the wrong CC in it, and somebody else wrote to me, a very chap who was a BBC producer, wrote back to me and said, love your book, Doug, but actually that bit's wrong. So when I did the second edition, I changed it. So all those things, you're learning all the time, you learn along the way. And also the chap called Martin Higgins from Tweedlecoat, who's a little local press, who did this for me here. He again made some changes to it, not too many, made an odd word here and there, but he did get me to change the very first chapters. He said that you need to have a bit more impact, and I sort of jiggled about. I didn't change much of it. I just jiggled about the running order, and again that helped me because he said those opening pages are critical. So.
Yeah, it's one of the things you're always told, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got to have a hook. Yeah. You've got to get the readers really interested. Well, it's interesting. I'm co-writing a book at the moment, and it's that. Do you start with something really hard-hitting, shocking, which is not normally my style, but I am learning how to change things.
Yes.
Yeah. It's important, I think, to get it right.
Can I add? I think as well, you have to be not too proud to say that there are things here you need to change, because you could stick. You could jump in the trough, couldn't you? Just and stay there. So no, I like that as it is.
A lot of people do.
And if you'd ever asked me, my brother, when he was a young man, had a Triumph Bonneville, so I could have probably told you all about CC if you needed it. So there you go. He loved it to death. Moving on while you've got that, what are you currently working on?
I have written a prequel to my first 2 books, this Wimbledon series, which is about the bank manager who robs his own bank. And it's set in a north. Before I went into advertising, I was a very young man. I worked in a bank for about 2 years. So again, that was a very raw experience. And it's set in the early 60s, and it's a time really, it's still, even when I was in the 70s, it was still Captain Mannering-ish in terms of the way the bank manager was a man who had a lot of respect in a small town. So you tipped your hat to him, and he was like the lawyer and the doctor and what have you. So that story is about them, and he is very eccentric, and it's got a lot of wild things in it, and people have read it and think it's very funny. So what I've done is I've written 2 of the books. I've written the prequel now, and it's called Rotten Riding, and it's set in the 1950s, and it's when the bank manager decides he becomes ambitious and wants to run a big city branch. And the only way he can do it is to come north. He lives in Godalming at the moment in lovely leafy Surrey. and he comes to live in this place called Brittany, which is you could say it's somewhere in the West Riding. It could be Dewsbury, it could be Batley, it could be any of those places that I worked in when I was in advertising and knew people in there and I knew what it was like. And he comes back into this very gritty environment. And of course, he's, as the deputy manager says, don't try and be posh. Don't try and be something you're not. He's called Mr. Aspel, the hero. He said, just be what you are. We all know you're a posh blow-in, so just make certain you can lower the rates for your customers. But it's about the characters he meets, and it's about declining industries and the arrogance of some. So it's about, the little summary would be, is when the rich are getting poor and the poor are getting richer.
Well, that's all changed.
Oh, we're all poor now. Yeah.
Yeah. Back to you, Netta. What are you currently writing on?
I did go back because I used to, of those 4 college degrees I got, none of them were what I started in, which was an art major. So I have come to quite enjoy designing covers that don't really matter. So I went back because I wrote a prequel for this as well, and I went back and redesigned the cover yesterday. There's bookmarks on the chair. If you guys go to my website, you can get the prequel to the Vivien Brandt series for free. You can download it as an e-novella. So see if you like my writing. But currently, I am working on the 3rd Vivien Brandt mystery called Shipped to Slaughter, which is going to be fun. I think I'm about 10 chapters in. It's proving to be a lot of fun because in the first 2 books, Vivien is trying to adapt to the British way of doing things, to the language, to the food, to the customs, to figuring out what people say when they say, do you want to come to tea? She has no idea if it's high tea, dinner, lunch, whatever. So those are the first 2 books are her getting used to that. But in the 3rd book, she and Geoffrey and their neighbors and some of her British family go on a cruise, an Alaskan cruise, and they all have to adjust to the Americans. So I'm having a lot of fun reversing that sort of thing in the 3rd book. And plus, just, who doesn't want to write a murder mystery on a cruise? You've got to do one. If you're doing a series, you got to have one.
I do have a list of every cocktail and what they're made of, if you ever need it. That was my research on a cruise that I did, but I haven't written the book yet.
Not just describing them, but actually drinking them.
Well, you have to take your research seriously. Yeah. It's no good. And I have a recipe for another cocktail that friends tried on our last holiday. It was revolting, which was great. It's a shame because it had champagne in it. But if you looked at it, it was a thing with the puffy smoke and all the rest of it. Now, if you wrote about it and said how wonderful it was, wouldn't cut it because it wasn't that good. So there you go. You have to try these things, though obviously not murder because that's possibly illegal.
It's funny because for my birthday last year, my husband, who is quite nice in this respect, he booked us a few days at Berg Island Hotel down in Devon, which is where Agatha Christie wrote Evil Under the Sun, and Then There Were None. And he actually booked us into the beach house where she wrote those. So I was sitting there going, I've got to write something, Shipped to Slaughter. But you'd be in their beautiful 1940s Art Deco lounge with a peacock window, and they had all these cocktails named after, like Miss Fisher's cocktail, and they were all named after different, authors and heroes in murder mysteries. And I was ready to just board up the door and just stay forever.
And did you try the cocktails?
Of course. Every night.
So from history, Doug, you were saying about the banking world in the 50s, 60s, 70s, which was, and I remember the bank being a very serious place, and you queued up very politely and touched your forelock when you're asking for £2 out of your own account.
Checks, look at them.
Checks, yeah. I still got a checkbook. But moving on, when we're looking at writing, a lot of writers now are using or exploring artificial intelligence. Doug, you've got the thing. Do you use it, and how do you use it?
The short answer is no, I haven't used it. But I'll be honest with you. I was writing a short story, which I haven't finished. I've only just written about 500 words of it. And it's because I've had some short stories published by Fairlight Books in Oxford, and I haven't done any short stories for a while. And this short story is a little ghost story. It's about a girl that's getting on a train. And she's in London, and she's going down the platform. She sees a friend wave, what have you. She gets on this train, and when she gets on the train, as the train moves out, she obviously goes in another time warp, and she looks out, and she sees children on the platform with little labels around them. So she's going back to the 40s, and actually what the thing about the story is she's going back to meet a brother of her grandfather who was killed in the war, but that's by the by. But as she's walking to school and thinking about it, I had no idea what a 14-year-old girl would be. Well, I got an idea, but I don't have a detailed idea, what her issues would be and what would be troubling her. So I went to ChatGPT and said, what would be the issues that a young girl of 14 years old in 2021 would be concerned about? And it came back with 2 pages of A4, just rattled off within a second about those. Some of them were ideas I already had, worried about parents, boyfriends, and all this, but it had other issues in there. And to be fair, I've used some of that in those thought processes as she's going to the platform. So I have used that in that sense, but I'm not going to use the words, but it has sparked some things I didn't know about.
I have to say I am tempted. I know some people have used AI in their writing. Netta, are you an AI fan? Or maybe not.
Having spent my life in Silicon Valley, I know just how faulty these things can be. So if I don't use it in my writing, I just don't find the need. I'd rather it came straight out of my imagination and my personality. However, I have used it in things like blurbs and marketing copy and things like that, not straight from it, but as Doug said, you can just put in something and get a lot of ideas to shoot from. To be inspired by and maybe move around and make them your own. So I do use it for that.
Thank you. Well, has anybody from the audience got any questions for our authors? Well, yes.
Sorry, is your new book a one-off?
Is it what, sorry?
A one-off.
One-off, or could there be a sequel?
I don't know, sorry. No,
You're on.
I'm on it. No, I don't think there'll be a sequel to this. No, I don't think so. I have to mention to everybody, this is now available on Kindle, which is only with effect from yesterday, I think. So if you want to buy a Kindle version, which is cheaper than buying the paperbacks, go to Amazon. I've got to do a sell. I used to be in marketing.
We can get you a job in marketing, free of course, mates rates. But I think most authors will agree that one of the most difficult things, and Julie and I here were talking about this earlier, is actually marketing your books, and it is so difficult.
It is.
But we plod on. Thank you. Any other questions? Well.
Yes, there's a question here, I think.
Oh, sorry, John.
It's a general question, really. You talk about editing and getting a good editor to look at the final manuscript. Do you actually edit as you go along, or do you think, I'll leave it until later and potentially forget about it? Do you occasionally rewrite in the middle of what you do?
I edit as I go along, actually. Yes, and I rewrite, and sometimes I come back. There used to be a great phrase in advertising, and one of my great pals, in fact, the chap who dedicated this book to, called Tim Gill, who was a very good copywriter, he used to say, Doug, it's what you've got to do is the morning after test. And you may have written a brochure, you may have written a radio commercial, you may have written a TV commercial or something or other, but you've always got to go back and have a look at it again. And going back and having a look at it again, it's amazing how you get a different idea, a different perspective. I write a Substack. If anybody's heard of what a Substack is, but it's a bit like a blog. And I wrote one yesterday, the day before. I posted it yesterday, but I rewrote it considerably when I'd looked at it the following day. So yes, definitely, most definitely.
Netta, do you want to?
Sorry,
That's okay.
Thank you.
I just the other day I came across to advice, because as a writer you're always looking for advice from other writers, and the phrase was, "Don't worry about getting it right, just get it writ." So yeah, I do tend to go plow through, and then I do go back and do a second edit and sometimes a third edit. The other useful thing I do is I have beta readers. I have a beta reader group, and of about 5 or 6 people,
That's good.
part American, part British, to catch all those little differences. And they go through and do what's called a developmental edit and say, does the story work? Are there scenes that threw you out of it? That sort of thing. Not really, is everything spelled right, but does the story work as a whole?
Yeah.
And that really helps.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Well, can I say thank you very much to our authors and thank you for coming. They are around for a little bit longer, so if you want to go and look at their books or just have a chat, they will be there. But thank you very much, and thank you too.
Thank you all.
Thank you.